So let's go ahead. It's 4:04. We will go ahead and get started today. So many familiar names, and I'm so happy to see you all back with us. This is, for some of you, I think it's like your fifth session with me. So I'm so excited to have you back. And my name's Katie Mosley, and I work for the IEP Technical Assistance Center if we haven't met. I've got a couple of newbies with us today, so I'll let the two of them go ahead and introduce themselves. Sorry, got a little accent there going on.
All right, I'll go first. I'm Gail Ringwalt, and some of you might have seen me in different trainings. I've had lots of paraprofessionals. I was a teacher for a long time, then an administrator. So here I am. So ask away questions, whatever information we think we will be able to help you answer those questions.
That's what we're shooting towards. Well, good afternoon. I'm Alisa Stovall, and I've been with the Technical Assistance Center since the very beginning. When we weren't a TA center, we were we were a resource center and all kinds of other things. It's been a long time, and I've always taught students with emotional and behavioral disorders, and so I kind of bring that behavioral piece around and did a few things as an administrator, but it was always a lot more fun to be closer to students and families in the classroom. So we're glad to have you here.
All right, so just like the trainings that we have gone through before, we have that Padlet resource in case you're new. Maybe this is your first webinar with us, and if that's the case and you feel comfortable, throw that up in the chat just so that we know if we have any new people joining us for this webinar. The Padlet will contain the PowerPoints. We post them normally after the presentation, so you can check back for that Padlet. We have, oh, Lee, yes, first time. Okay, awesome. So glad to have you here. We have been making some adjustments and changes to some of our PowerPoints, so bear with us. Just give us a little extra grace in case we don't have it posted immediately after. And another first timer, Renee, awesome to have you with us. So just a reminder, the Padlet has some different ideas for you guys, slides, videos, research and reference documents. Gail or Alisa, if one of you could please type that Padlet into the chat so that if someone wants to copy and paste it into their browser, they can do that. You can also scan the QR code with your phone if you would rather do that, if you want to pull it up at any point. So that Padlet is for you guys. It'll be up there as long as Padlet exists.
Hey, and I'm just going to interject for the first timers. If you missed session 1, because this is session 2, and you want the recording for that, if you send me an email, which will be at the end, I will send you that as well as this session too.
And so before we jump in, just like always, if you guys have a question, please feel free to throw it in the chat. Feel free to use the raise your hand feature. You can be on camera, you can be off camera, you can show a picture of your dog, your cat, whatever you would like. You can do whatever makes you comfortable. So choice is the friend here. So we will go ahead. I'm not sure who has the PowerPoint up, but if you could advance the slide, please.
Oh, I do. Hold on.
And the Padlet is, you can see the link here already. I checked it and everything.
Where'd I go? Hold on. Where's my? There we go.
All right, so today our conversation is all about behavior, and it's about can't do versus won't do. So we will talk quite a bit about student behavior. We're going to specifically look at things like task avoidance and refusal as a form of communication. And you can't see my shirt very well. I'm going to stand up, but I have on a t-shirt that says, oh, it's going to blur me out. All behavior is a form of communication. I thought that was appropriate for today's webinar. Unfortunately, you can't see it very well. But we're going to look at some different practices that encourage student engagement and participation. We know that when our students are more engaged, they're less likely to act out. And then we're going to look at some scenarios and talk through some scenarios of applying some of the material that we learned today. All right, so as we jump into this training, I want you to think about one strategy that you've used to build relationships with students at school this year, because we know that relationship building is an important piece when it comes to behavior and student behavior. So if you want to throw something in the chat, that is great. If you want to unmute and tell us something that you have done, that would also be a great option. Anne said, asking about interest. Yes, getting to know their names. Oh my goodness, it is so important to learn the names of students.
Also pets and siblings. Siblings' names.
Yep. Learning a student's name and learning how to pronounce it correctly goes such a long way to our students. It really lets them know that we care about them. Trying to read the other things, talk about likes for sure.
Sorry.
I like the story of getting my first cat. That sounds like that might be an interesting story there. Participating in community circles, learning about what student triggers are. Let's see.
Oh, there's a great one. Let's match tomorrow, for instance, everybody wears blue.
Oh, I like that. Pets, favorite food. Saying each student's name, yes, yes, and being able to greet them. For sure. You guys have some great ideas in there.
All right, here we go. Okay.
Are you good, Gail?
I think so. It seems to have a mind of its own today.
That's all right.
Okay.
Leslie, you made the comment that relationships are everything, and I would completely agree with that. And really, research tells us that and supports that too. We know that when students feel like they belong, that they're going to perform better. We'll talk a lot about that in the executive function training as well, because that's all part of it. It all goes together. And I love that. They have to know you love them and honestly care about them for sure.
Do you
All
want me to?
right. So just some things to remember as we go into this. Gail, are you freaking out about the blue?
No,
Oh.
I'm used to it now. It is what it is. I will say though, things to remember about that all kids are gen ed kids first, but also remember that paraprofessionals, you are so important. As a teacher, I always had paraprofessionals and I could not do without them. They were just an integral part of helping me help kids. Where did that blue mark come from? Now that you mention it.
Now that we're all staring at it.
Anyway, go ahead.
So really, we just need to keep in mind that all students must be given access to general education curriculum And they must be educated in the least restrictive environment. And so we know that each student who has an IEP has a section on that IEP that has their least restrictive environment. And we want that to be hopefully with general education peers as much as possible. But really, it depends on what that student's need is. So paraprofessionals, of course, help to make that happen. All right, and the next slide. Okay, so here we get behavior is communication for sure. So as we consider just some of the different pieces on this slide, I want us to really consider what some of our actions might be, because our actions will for sure also be a form of communication to that student, just like their behavior is a form of communication to us. So just considering, the reasons behind the action and really taking that and considering it and pondering it. It can happen for a variety of reasons, but thinking also about how actions change in different environments. We know that we act differently when we're maybe with our friends, or when we're in a class, or when we are on a basketball court or a soccer field or a lacrosse field. But think also about how our actions set a tone for others. Oh, my computer is having,
Are you,
it's just having a party on its own. So,
are you good?
yeah, I'm
Okay.
good. Okay, so behavior also, and our actions rather, help or hinder getting the job done. And we know that sometimes our behavior is going to set a negative tone and it's going to inhibit us from getting things done. But our positive attitude and positive actions and behaviors can also really propel a job to get done and help us to excel at it. And then we have the verbal and nonverbal communication piece. Sometimes what we don't say speaks louder than what we do say. But really think about how we set a tone for how we do our jobs each day and how that relates to responsibilities and roles. And we can really reflect on that from our first session together. We talked about the different roles of paraprofessionals. Gail,
And
anything?
sometimes,
Yep.
and sometimes that nonverbal communication, if you're a para and you're really in tune with a student, you will notice their body language and some nonverbal communication that they might have that will help you understand what they're trying to communicate.
And this is such an important concept to think about and talk about a little bit, because think about our own behavior. Depending on where we are, we act differently. If I'm at a basketball game, I'm probably going to be screaming and yelling and maybe eating a handful of popcorn at the same time. If I'm visiting someone in the hospital, I'm not likely to be using those same behaviors in that moment. But then again, maybe I'm visiting someone that just had a new grandbaby, and so we're all happy and joking. It really is the context that you're in, and what gets communicated. Sometimes, we go with what we know. So it may feel or look like a mismatch to someone else, when we sometimes have to back up and think, okay, this is a different setting for this particular individual. And maybe they don't know what the expectations are for where we are when we go in the cafeteria. So we remind them of that. You don't stand up and eat, on the table. This is what you do here.
Okay, here we go. Can you see it change, Katie?
Yep, you
Okay.
are good. So when we talk about behavior and considering some of our own actions and behavior, one thing that we want to consider is our own mindset. So I just want us to take a minute and kind of reflect a little bit. I promise we won't get too touchy-feely and all of that. good stuff. You get as much of this, as deep into this as you want, but really reflecting on what's your why? Why is it that you go to school every day? Why do you go to your job? Why do you love it? What are maybe some opportunities for growth that you can think of? What drives you to be an educator? And really, you are an educator. Sometimes I meet with paras, I'm sure Gail and Alisa can attest to this too, and they don't consider themselves an educator. And I just shake my head and say, you're every bit of an educator as a teacher is. So don't doubt that. And you are making such an impact on the students who you see every day. So think about that. And sometimes we have to revisit our why and why we are doing what we want to do every day. Another thing to consider, oh, hold on.
My bad.
That's all right, is your mindset. How do you approach every day? And I want to be the first to admit it's difficult to enter into every single day with a great positive outlook. Sometimes it gets downright difficult and challenging to come in with a positive mindset every day to our jobs. And I try not to talk too much about myself or share too many stories, because I always say nobody wants to hear that because I'm pretty boring. But right before I got on this webinar, my daughter called, and she usually calls me about this time every day on her way home from school. So she is a first-year teacher. Actually, she's in her first semester. She is filling in a maternity leave. She graduated with her bachelor's degree in English education in December. But today was a tough day, and she's had a tough go at this school that she is in, and she's with 8th graders. And she was like, Mom, I really struggled today. She's like, I wonder if I have been wearing rose-colored glasses with education and teaching. And I'm like, honey, it's one bad day, like one rough day. You can't let one rough day dictate your decision to want to go to school every day and to be a teacher and to impact students' lives. So thinking about our own mindset, a bad 5 minutes doesn't make a terrible day, and one bad day doesn't make a terrible year of teaching. Also consider assumptions that we make about student behavior or about a specific student's behavior, because sometimes we do that. We make those assumptions. We make assumptions based on all sorts of different things. And sometimes, will check myself because I make an assumption about someone's behavior based on my own thoughts and preconceived ideas when I'm really not considering that individual. Also consider behaviors that your colleagues assume. Assumptions that your colleagues have, because those can impact your behaviors too. And knowing maybe if you're going to go into a situation where those assumptions are more positive or negative, and that can affect the choices that you make about maybe where you go in your day, and who you're interacting the most with. But I want you to think about, what's your greatest mindset barrier? So what's different this year or the past few years that maybe keeps you from having that ideal mindset? And I know there are several things going on in the chat, so trying to.
Yeah, I hear I see exhaustion. My mindset every day is a new day, which is a real positive thing to think about. And exhaustion.
For sure.
Just thinking back, I've been a teacher for a while, and there are days that you need somebody to kind of be a champion for you. You walk into the office. I had somebody that worked in the office that was kind of my person. I'd walk in and say, I quit today. I'm done. I'm gone. And I'd hear, see you tomorrow, as I walked out, and I'd roll my eyes and go home, and I'd be back the next day. But having somebody that can kind of keep you going sometimes, because that exhaustion, that frustration can kind of get in the way of what we know we're doing as good work and supporting learners.
Well, Gail,
Okay.
oh, there you are, Gail. Can you advance this?
Yeah, sorry. Make sure they lock me in.
Okay, so
Okay.
this is more for reflection, but just to think about how is your mindset communicated through your behavior while at work? So just thinking about, you know, the previous couple of slides that we've talked through, behavior is communication, and really considering our own mindset. Sometimes, you know, our actions will be impacted by our mindset, and sometimes not so much. Sometimes we might be just really kind of going through it, but we're still there with a smile on our face and being as helpful as we can for our students, because that's really what we know they need. And I know someone put in the chat that sometimes the parents and how they treat you, that can impact mindset. And I would agree completely with that, because we're human too, and we have feelings and thoughts and considerations, and we allow ourselves to get hurt and sometimes with that. Nikki, was there anything you wanted to add with this slide? I know this is something that you're kind of passionate about.
Yeah, I didn't need to add anything, but I think that's really is the biggest thing, is that recognizing that the kind of day we have, the experiences we have, the way we're feeling with, you know, in our general day, it is impacted. It is behaviorally, it comes out in our behavior, right? So the day that you're exhausted and you were up all night with your sick toddler and you have to still get up and go to school the next day, that is, you know, going to show through in your behavior. And what we can do is really be mindful of that. And so understanding that that will happen to our students as well. If they didn't sleep well last night, they're coming to school exhausted. And so then they have to they're behaving in a way that shows that. And we have so much, you know, control over how we can react to that with our students, but also how we can model for them how we treat others when we are exhausted, and how we treat others when we're feeling upset. And all of that modeling happens day in and day out. And that's so key to this next part. Like, what do I do when I feel frustrated? What does happen when I don't know what I'm doing? How do I respond? And modeling that behavior and then responding to how students, you know, behave is going to be a big piece of it. That is how they communicate to us what they're doing.
For sure.
There is a comment in the that someone just put in, says, I try not to judge since I have a child with special needs. I always try to put myself in the kid's shoes.
Yeah.
I like that piece of advice.
Yeah, empathy.
So when we think about trying to understand our student mindset, which, gosh, I kind of feel like that might be an oxymoron, especially those darn preteens and early teens. I still can't figure out those middle schoolers. They're my favorite group ever, but trying to understand them some days. But the student mindset is based on 3 R's, and you can see this piece of information comes from Pete Hall and Kristen Sowers, and they have some great information about student behavior and mindset. But really, the 3 R's that they talk about are relationship, responsibility, and regulation. So we've mentioned that all behavior is a form of communication. And so when we see the students acting in ways that may be less than the desirable or preferred way, really looking at what is it that the student is seeking. So for the relationship piece, maybe it's a meaningful connection. Sometimes we know that the students don't have an adult at home or outside of the school life. And so maybe they're looking to create that relationship with someone at school, and they don't always know how to go about that in a healthy way, especially if the relationships that are modeled to them within the home setting are less than functional. So we can also look at, sometimes it's for responsibility, that sense of self-worth, efficacy, and competence. And so really looking at those things that student mindset is shaped by. And then we have that regulation piece, just taking in stimuli, managing that emotional and behavioral response. And so sometimes these three elements can really show us, when we step back and think about it, what is it that our student is trying to communicate? What is it that they are trying to seek from us or from someone else? So as we go through this next piece, I want you to think about a student who you have right now, or if you don't have a student currently, maybe a student in the past who you've encountered who is struggling. And I want you to consider, what is it that they could be seeking? So could it be a connection? Could it be some sort of regulation? Maybe it's confidence. But when we know what our students are seeking, then we can tailor our interventions and support to really what's driving that student behavior. And we have many sorts of different interventions and supports that we use in education that align with what our students are seeking. So we can look at some of that FBA information and behavior supports. So those of you who are looking at like the IEP at a glance and you're seeing where those student needs are, you can see those behavior plans, you know what those behavior supports are, you can use that. That is a very formal plan that is in place for those students who might be struggling with behavior. Then we have some of these less formal strategies that we can try. So if a student is really seeking that connection piece, one, it's not really an intervention, more of a strategy that you can use is that 2x10 strategy. So if you're unfamiliar with this, the 2x10 strategy is taking 2 minutes a day for 10 consecutive school days to engage and talk with a student. And the rule is you can talk about anything except school. So finding out some of those things that you guys commented earlier in the chat, getting to know about their pets, their likes, the things that they're interested in. That is so beneficial, but it's just 2 minutes a day for 10 consecutive school days to try to get to know the student a little better. Maybe the student needs some confidence. So some different things that you can try with them are giving them like a classroom job, and maybe not a classroom job if you don't have your own room where you're working with students, but maybe if you have a small group, you could give them a job. Even something as simple as like keeping time, saying, I have this really important job today in this group. I need someone to keep me on time. So at 2:10, I need someone to remind me that it's 2:10 so that we can wrap up this group. Or maybe some guided practice that you can use with the student. Maybe the student is seeking some sort of regulation, so you could have some sort of extra break, maybe some sensory support, maybe they need something in their hands to fidget with. Of course, I always say that if you give a student a fidget, be sure that you teach them how to use it and let them know what the expected behaviors are, because when we just give students fidgets, it's like in our mind, we know how we want them to interact with them, but we have to be direct and explicit with how the fidget is to be used. It saves, you know, things on our end of just being able to, you know, we know that we have explained to the student how to interact with the fidget, and this is how you keep it by interacting with it appropriately. But our students need that direct, explicit instruction. And so the more clear we can be with them, the better it is. Clear is kind, for sure.
And I will say something about the errorless learning, because sometimes it's hard. It is guided practice. It is leading the student to the correct answer so that they gain some confidence. It's not telling them the answer. And that's the mistake some people make. So it's not saying, well, here's the answer, but it's leading them through questioning to the correct answer to try to give them some of that confidence that you do know, because students often, as we know, are sometimes don't want to make a guess or make a statement because they're not sure. So the errorless learning isn't about telling them answers. It's about guiding them to the correct answer.
For sure. And so that's like those scaffolds and supports that we're kind of like putting up. We want to, you know, when we're learning a new skill or something, we're going to really direct them toward that right answer, but then we can take them away.
Right.
Great comment, Gail.
So now we have behaviors are communicating, and it's either a can't do or a won't do. And I don't know about you, but it's much easier to deal with the can't do than it is the won't. Won'ts often become very frustrating. But the can't do is, does the student not know how to do it? They don't understand the direction. They don't have the background knowledge to complete it, or they've missed something, or they need materials. For some reason, they don't have the skill. They can't do it. They won't do it means you think they understand it, but they are refusing to perform a task. Whether that's their lack of regulation, whether that's a lack of motivation, it can be a lot of different things that we'll talk about in a minute, but it's the can't do versus the won't do. And the more you get to know the students, the quicker you are to be able to identify which it is.
And it's important to figure out, you know, if it is really a can't do versus won't do, because sometimes the won't do is really a result because they don't know how to do something.
Correct. All right, so if they can't do something, first of all, if you have the IEP at a glance and you know that the accommodations and any supports that are in there are being offered, that's the first thing where you can look. Sometimes it is a matter of teaching a task or reteaching a task. Maybe they just need a little practice. They just need you to tell them, one of their classmates to tell them what they are to do instead of just the teacher giving instruction. So maybe they need to be taught the task or retaught the task. Sometimes you can change the steps. You can change the sequence of the way you do things. So you can do task A before, or you can do task B before task A to see if you can get them to be able to perform the task. You can add supports. Maybe they need counters, some manipulatives to do the math problems, or some visuals. So those are things that you can do if a student can't perform the task. And truly, sometimes if they work with other students, we all have been where you listen to a student tell another student what to do, and it's your exact words, but somehow magically, if their neighbor says it, they get it, even though you said it that exact same way. So sometimes in a peer group or a small group, students can perform a task if they couldn't do it before. Or again, you might help them by doing assisting completing one step of the process and then let them continue to give them a little confidence. Anybody have anything to add? So if you won't perform a task, it gets a little harder. But like Katie said, sometimes they won't do it because they can't do it. So you have to be able to distinguish. As you learn the kids, you learn what is really going on. So if they won't do it, you could rearrange the task, how it's set up. You could change the reinforcement. The problem with reinforcements are you don't really want kids to do things for something. So you can't always say, oh, you get a sticker. Because first of all, as they get older, what they'll work for gets more expensive. And stickers may work for a while for a kindergartner, and then all of a sudden they don't want a sticker anymore. So then you're like, oh, I got to think of something else. So your reinforcements don't always have to be something tangible. And sometimes you can sequence the tasks to work up to whatever you want to do. So you can do an easier task followed by a harder task, or one of those, first we'll do this, then we'll do that. First this, then that. You have to be careful because you don't want to do the hard thing first, because we all know if you eat the chocolate cake, you're never eating the broccoli. So you have to be careful with the kid knowing what they like and don't like in order to put the sequence in the correct order. And you can have red, yellow, and green tasks. It's not like the red, yellow, and green behaviors. It's what's the hardest, what can you do and by yourself, but maybe need a little help, and what can you do all by yourself. So you could intersperse the tasks and put them in little, set them up so the kids know in each bucket what tasks they have so that they can also pick which one they want to do.
You know, another strategy that for older kids, because it's hard to sometimes motivate older kids. Or, not everybody wants to work for candy, but just kind of setting them up for a win. So giving them an answer to something that we're going to be discussing the next day, so that you've got this information. I'm going to ask the question. You've got the answer. I'm going to look to you. And unless you panic and you can wave me off, we'll have a little sign, but you've got an opportunity just to participate, just to give an answer to something and to become part of the discussion. Some kids just kind of need that nudge to get going.
Yes, and also kids need to be a part of it. So if kids understand the accommodations that might have, or if kids understand the things they need, maybe they need a graphic organizer, maybe they need a calculator, I don't know. But if kids have a better understanding of what they need to complete a task, especially tasks that they don't want to perform, so if they don't like writing, what is in place and what do they understand that they can ask for in order to make that task doable for them? So oftentimes we have students that we do goals, IEPs to them, but we kind of need to do it, especially as they get older, with them, so that they can also learn to verbalize what it is, why won't they do the task, or why can't they?
It's a little bit of problem solving. How can I take care of myself in this? I know I don't want to do this task. As adults, we do that all the time. There's lots of things that we don't want to do. And sometimes we give ourselves a little break. Sometimes we go get a coffee. Sometimes, we're going to treat ourselves by doing something after we get this task done. And kids need to learn how to do that too.
Right.
I want to share a quick example from one of my 7th grade friends. Back when I was in my classroom full time, I just wanted to share that this won't perform a task I sometimes find infuriating, right? We know there are so many students who can't do it and would love to have the opportunity, but this won't is so much more frustrating, as Gail kind of tipped at. But one of my friends in 7th grade, he would not pick up the pencil. He was perfectly capable, but he wouldn't. We tried, with an iPad, we tried pencil, we tried pen, we tried fuzzy stuff on the pen. It was a whole thing. We could not get him to pick up the pencil to show what he knew, or even do a recording. He just was in refusal mode. What we ended up determining was that we had to do something else funny first. So the students would, this was a co-taught class and everybody sort of got involved with it. What we figured out was that if he could do a little dance first. So the class would say, how about we dance before we pick up our pencils today? And then everybody would do a dance and pick up the pencil. That was the last dance move and do that. And then it was different because the starting task, the first task was, I'm going to stand up, twist around. Some days we would do a pencil tornado where you had to do a swirly tornado and then grab that pencil and swirl with the tornado with the pencil. And so it was just one of those silly tasks that mattered so little. But it was the idea he could not get over. He knew picking up the pencil was the task, and it made him crazy. And what we had to do was we had to think of something else to do first that kind of almost tricked him into it and felt like it wasn't about the pencil. It was about joining in on the fun and then getting going. And it was just this huge moment of success for him. So don't be afraid to let it be something silly as long as you get the desired performance at the end.
And don't hesitate to involve more than just that student, like Nikki's example, like it was the whole class, because then that doesn't separate them out from anybody else. And somebody else might need that same kind of activity, maybe not to the extent, but don't be afraid to, don't isolate necessarily a student that won't do it, but include them in a class-wide thing. I like that example. Okay. Who's next? Okay. So sometimes you have to scaffold learning. So sometimes there are temporary supports you can put into place that kids can use to work on until they are capable of doing something independently. So the idea is to put things into place and to help kids think of it kind of like a ladder where you go up as far as the kid needs and you get down as fast as you can. So you want to be able to provide kids the support they need, but you can't be the support for life, or we have to teach them to be independent. So the idea is to give them the supports that they need to complete the task until they are confident to do that themselves. And it can be a visual, a verbal, or written support, whatever it is that they need. Now, verbal supports are the most dependent support that you can have, because if you have to talk somebody through something all the time, they always have to have that person there. So if you think about a preschool class and they're teaching kids to wash their hands, you will hear them repeat the directions over and over again about turn on the water, right? Do the soap, put your hands under the water, etc. And they're verbalizing that. But then they move to pictures. So they have those visuals, the little pictures by the sink that show the kids the step for washing their hands. So the goal is then that after a while, they don't even need the pictures and they just know how to wash their hands. So think about what kind of support you need, knowing that verbal support is the most dependent and visual supports are less or more independent. And you kind of have to plan ahead, and although I know we can't always plan ahead because we don't always know what's coming, but once you have worked with kids for a while, you will have ideas in your head or in your back pocket about how to support kids when they need it. And you might have to think, oh my gosh, this worked yesterday, but today it's not working. So then you have to pull back from, you have to think, oh, what did Nikki do in that class? Or what did I do with that other kid that kind of had the same problem? So after you've done it for a while, you have a lot of ideas in your head about how to support kids as the need arises, because just like anybody else, the need arises constantly during the day. And a kid can't just get up and say, gotta go have a coffee break. I'll see you guys when I'm done. So we have to teach them how to do different things within the confines of a classroom. Anybody else got anything to add? Anybody?
I know we'll talk a lot more. I can't remember which session, but we have a whole session on prompting, and we'll
Right.
talk a lot about the different types of prompts, verbal prompts, nonverbal prompts, the prompting
Yeah.
ladder. So bear with us. We're going to get to a little bit more about that. I think one thing I just want to add to this is to remember that people aren't supports. And we'll go into a lot of detail with that. So just keep that in the back of your mind.
Hey, Gail, do you mind if I address something that came up in the chat real fast before you continue?
No, go ahead. Because yeah.
And so Renee in the chat said with nonverbal students, it's really hard. You have to play detective to understand whether it's can't do or won't do. And Renee, that is an excellent point. That's why I wanted to make sure I said it kind of out loud for everybody. But the good news is so many of these can't do and won't do strategies actually work to help you determine that as well. So as you're working with a student, if you decide to grab manipulatives are motivating in the engagement sense, and they're also motivating in the content where they help show the content. So whether you have a student who needs to move their hands while they work, or a student who just needs something different to do with like a fidget wise, or a student who needs to see the visual concept, these kinds of strategies actually will help across the board. So while it feels frustrating, sometimes just having these like best practices in your toolbox will help you kind of get to the bottom of some of that. I know it's not perfect, but both of these strategies can kind of help you as you're rebuilding the task for the student or trying to pick a different starting point. Those are all really helpful for those nonverbal students as well. Thank you for sharing that.
Yep.
Okay, so I know that
Did somebody ask a question? Okay, I thought I heard somebody talking. All right. So strategies, sometimes you can plan a strategy and sometimes you just have to think on your feet and to help with a task. And they are so many, and you have to be flexible. And again, you have to have a lot of them. And you need to also, the hardest part I think sometimes is fading them when the kid is showing progress. That is sometimes the hardest thing to do because we get so used to doing it. It's that idea that, oh gosh, they're doing it all by themselves. I have to start fading away, not drop dead today, here today, gone tomorrow, but that slow fading so that it gives them confidence and you know they can do something independently. So some examples of scaffolds that you could use in the classroom is the teacher will work the problem with steps and leave it up, and then let the kids help work through the problem. I saw a video once, and I wish I could find it again, that I used in one of my college classes where the teacher had a middle school class math, and she had a bell ringer, and she collected all the papers for this one problem, and then she would take the one that had the most mistakes. And I forget what she called it, but then she would put that up and the kids would work through to try to find the mistakes. She wouldn't tell them, she would just say, so the kids would talk it out to try to learn how to do the problem. Sometimes teachers can list the steps they want students to take. If it's a multi-step problem, to list the steps so that the kids get used to what comes next. Graphic organizers are a great strategy for use, especially for kids that don't like to write. I have found that really useful because it's not like you have to start out with a sentence. You can start out with a word, but graphic organizers. And also, sometimes I would have my para take the notes. I would be talking, she would be taking notes on our overhead projector. But that showed the kids how to take notes. And so they would copy her notes. And if she had a question, she would often stop and say, hey, I have a question. What does that mean or whatever? But at least that showed the students how to take the notes. Anybody else? Any other things does anybody have in the chat that scaffolds that they might have used in the classroom? No, okay. Okay, somebody want to do this one?
Yeah, I can talk through this one. I kind of
Okay.
shared in the chat. But I just wanted to share that there are some great examples of what teachers are doing in the classrooms already that are great examples of these scaffolds and strategies that might be overlooked. You might not even realize that you are already scaffolding your instruction in this way. One example of that is the anchor chart. You see that on the left side with context clues. Having these examples up and posted for the students to refer to. Again, that's a low, it's not as invasive for our students who need the extra help. It can be a quick glance. They don't have to raise their hand. They don't have to ask for that extra help. It doesn't have to be verbal. So that's an excellent opportunity there. There's also some great graphic organizers there in the middle. And it allows the students to kind of organize their own thoughts about a topic. Words I'm unsure of, words I've seen before, words I actually know what they mean and can use them in context. So being able to separate it out in that way allows that safety strategy. So at the end of reading a text, a student might think, I don't really know what happened there, but not really being able to verbalize, I don't know what happened there. So instead, we just see some behaviors, or we see, I can't do this, or I won't do this. And so what instead these graphic organizers give the opportunity, it's not you had to understand the whole reading to fill in those boxes there. It really just has to be, can you find one word that you know the meaning of? Can you find one word you struggled with? And so that makes it a safer place than just, I understood nothing about this, Mrs. Avina, which was something that they don't say very often. They communicate that in other ways. So these scaffolded opportunities, I loved this example of the graphic organizer because one of them was at the top there, you can see it's words they fill in, but on the bottom one, the teacher that I saw used it with sticky notes. So you could write the word on the sticky note, and then the whole class interacted by putting their sticky note on this big blown up chart version of that bottom one. And those can work across the curriculum, so that the context clues graphic organizer can work in science class just as well as it could work in third grade literacy. And you can use that across grade levels and content areas, which is helpful in different formats.
And also, these things are skills that kids can learn to use that some kids might use them all the time. And they might change the way it looks as they grow older and different, middle school than high school. But it's a skill that they've used to help them start or to understand something they can use going forward. So it might look like the one on the right, the context clues. It might just look like a chart instead of, a more elementary looking chart. But it's a skill that they can use then going forward independently.
These types of charts are also really great opportunities for just modeling our thinking. So addressing that metacognitive piece, where as adults, sometimes we do these things without realizing it. And this gives us all the opportunity to pause and show out loud for our students. This is what I do when I read something really hard. And sometimes things are hard for me to read. This is how I attack it. And we can model that for them using these kinds of strategies across the curriculum.
Can I just add one thing? When we post these charts and these graphic organizers around our rooms, if we keep them in the same location for the students to look at, brain research tells us that if they engage with it across the semester, let's say, you could take those charts down, and if they look at that point on the wall, they will remember that information. It's just a part of how our brains work. And so just having the continuity of, okay, this is how I do it and this is what it looks like, brings back the information. And that's a win for kids.
For sure.
And for people my age too.
This one
Okay.
I was gonna say, I can handle this one too, Gail, if you want.
Go ahead. It's math. I don't want to do math.
Okay. This one is a math example, and at that secondary level, I know many times it's harder to imagine what this could look like in that secondary classroom, so I included this one. Some things to keep in mind are that some of our students actually can do each of these steps individually, but sometimes they get lost in the process of it. So making sure that our students have a full example of step 1, step 2, step 3. This is what I do. And this goes along with that errorless learning for all of our students. We want them to be successful enough times that sometimes that process then becomes ingrained in their brain. We know that it's going to take repetitions of getting it right and not forgetting any steps, to remember that, that's what we do in the steps, just like the younger example with Gail gave of washing your hands, the steps for washing your hands. Eventually they don't need that, but we want them to be successful every time because we want all the germs gone, right? And so with these math problems in the same respect, we want them to get all of the steps right every time so that it becomes ingrained as part of their process. And then they're able to be successful in the actual math problems. Some great ways that I've seen teachers do this, they could use a framed tool like this. I also recently have been in a classroom where the teacher used page protectors. She was teaching secondary math in a very similar lesson to this one. And she said, I just know they're not ready yet. This particular group of students wasn't ready yet to own the process. And she put in a page protector a worksheet that had blanks. Each of these steps was blank, but there was a spot. It showed students step 1, review, multiplication sign rules, and those were there. Step 2 said multiply, and there was a space that had it for the students to do it with that little helper that you see on the right side there, that mnemonic device, that foil. And then there's a spot for 3. So instead of looking at a blank paper and thinking, how am I supposed to remember all of these steps? These students had in that page protector and were able to write with a whiteboard marker right on the page protector. These are the steps. The example this teacher gave me, she said, if I gave these students a blank whiteboard, all they would probably do is draw pictures in the corners or write bad words or all of these things that communicated their frustration. But by putting it into that page, the sleeve protector, and being able to write, it was still a whiteboard marker. They still looked very similar to their peers. All of those things were the same, but they just had that extra support right there in front of them with that sheet in there to keep them on track. So those are some great examples of that. You can do the same thing with a paragraph frame in English language arts as well.
Okay, so prompting, we will talk about it, as Katie said, later, but just as an overview, there are different, and I'm just going to say, remember that this is prompting. This is not restraint. So when we get to physical, it is not, we're not talking about restraining. We are talking about prompting. And we will dig in deeper, but there are cues you can use to prompt, verbal, nonverbal, or a picture. So you can say, hey, remember when? Or you can use your finger to tap on a paper or on a space. So you can use those kinds of cues. You can use visual cues, modeling. We do that a lot. And physical. And what the physical would be mostly used for students with, like, who are blind and or have low vision, or kids with other disabilities where you have to actually physically move their hands or help them feel something or move something or write, where you would actually have to touch them. But those are the levels of prompting. And I think we have a whole session, is it the next one maybe? Is on all these different levels of prompting. So the whole point of everything that we do really is to have a student by the end of K-12 be independent. That is our goal, is to increase a student's independence. We don't want them to have us right by their side when they're a 12th grader. So we have to work on increasing a student's independence. And we can do that by providing choice. I mean, do you want to do the addition or the subtraction problems first? And you just have to be sure that your choices are choices that you're okay with. So it's like getting a student or getting your own child to eat their vegetables, right? You could say, do you want green beans or carrots? You don't really care which they pick. They're both vegetables. So you can provide choice, just be sure that you're okay with either choice that you provide. So sometimes that takes a little thought, but you can give a student choice. Sometimes it's how you schedule things. Sometimes we might have to rearrange a schedule to help students become more independent. Routines are great for increasing independence. What do you do every day at the end of the day to get ready to go home? We're going to teach you that the teacher doesn't have to put everything in your book bag. What do you have to do? Do you have to have a book? Do you have to have a pencil? Do you have to have paper? Do you have to have a note that is getting sent home? It's a routine. What do you do every day? For some students, generalizing is hard because they don't do well. They can learn something in one setting, but then they don't generalize it to someplace else. So sometimes you have to help them generalize and plan it so that they learn that they can do things in different places. And then there's always the I do it, we do it, you do it. So you do it and you model it or you show them how. You do it together with the student or students, and then the students can do it by themselves. So it's I do, we do, you do. And then the last one is just learning to monitor your own frustration. And sometimes that's the hardest thing when you know it's hard for the students when they're frustrated. They don't always do very well at not having some sort of meltdown when they're frustrated. But we have to learn how to monitor our own frustration with students that won't do something or aren't getting it or are not picking one of our choices and aren't. It's frustrating. I get it, but we just have to work on trying not to show that we're frustrated. I don't know. Anybody else have any ideas how to do that?
Well, I think
sometimes it's really
too,
hard.
in adding to that is that sometimes when we get frustrated, we just take over and do the task. And so really, you know, as we get maybe frustrated and wanting to move on, just to take a step back and really analyze if do I need to just be a little more patient so that they can work this out and tie their own shoe, or do I just need to tie it for them, for example?
Right. And to that example, sometimes you have to think about the situation. When I was the principal at the School for the Blind, learning how to dress yourself is really difficult. And if you're a mom, and like Katie said, tying your shoe, and you're trying to get out the door, and the kid wants to try to do it themselves, or is not doing it fast enough, and you just do it because you have to go. I used to tell my parents, look, put them on the bus in their pajamas. You know, we had clothes for all the kids at school. Just put them on the bus in their pajamas. And when they get to school, the OT, the teacher, the house parent, somebody will help them get dressed and will learn how to do it. So don't get frustrated. Don't do it for them necessarily, but just send them in their pajamas. So sometimes you have to think about what is happening. Like if there's a fire drill, you don't have time for the kid to put on their coat themselves. You just have to get that coat on and go. But if you have time, then you're more relaxed, they're more relaxed, and you can say, listen, if you can't get your coat on, you're going to miss part of recess. So just thinking about the situation and how much time you have, and to try to make it the least frustrating for both you and the student. And I had lots of kids show up in their pajamas. Oh. Okay, so how do you encourage success? There are things you can minimize, like distractions. Some kids need to sit in a cubby where they can't see other kids around them. Some kids need to sit in the front. Some kids need to sit by the teacher or not next to their best friend. So you can minimize those distractions to encourage successful. You can make sure that the directions and the expectations are clear. Sometimes kids think they know, but they don't. So saying things like, can you tell me what the directions are? What are the expectations? And having them verbalize it back to you, you will find the places where maybe some clarification is needed on instructions or expectations. So don't be afraid to ask the students, what did the teacher just say? And sometimes my para would say to them, I'm a little confused about what Miss Ringwalt just said. So could you tell me what she was talking about, to try to get the kids then to verbalize what they thought the directions were. And sometimes that inappropriate behavior, again, sometimes we have to teach the kids how to take 5. And that's all it takes. But we don't often do that. But we all take 5. But how do you take 5 in a classroom when you're frustrated, or you know you're going into a class or an assignment that you don't really want to do, or you're not confident in? So how do you just age appropriately take 5 minutes to think, okay, I just have to self-regulate myself before I go into this task. You can maximize your instructional time to encourage success. Make sure there's lots of, for positive reinforcement, it doesn't have to be a thing. It can just be a good job. Just being aware of what the kids are doing, especially kids that have been frustrated. So if a student's not doing well in math and you're walking around and they're doing math problems and somebody does it right, and you need to say right then, what a great job, you did it. You did that one right. So it's that catching the kids doing things they're supposed to be doing for that positive reinforcement. So take all the opportunities that you can for that. And always, your relationships are what are going to have the most impact. That positive relationship that you have with a student, every kid needs a champion. If you're the one that they feel that they have a positive relationship with, that will take you a long way. Anything else anybody has to add?
You know, actually, I'm thinking about helping our students learn to self-reflect. You know, how did I do today? You know, it was a banner day. The morning was great, but the afternoon wasn't so hot because of, but just sometimes in part of encouraging success is, how am I doing? And how do I think I'm doing? And it's just another skill that kids can develop so that they can talk about what's going on around them, what they need, what they've had enough of, and do that appropriately. And that's part of encouraging success. Just, how am I doing? How do I think I'm doing? Not what anybody else told me. And to have us listen to that, I think, is very powerful. And when they can share that with the people that they're around every day, or maybe they tell a friend, or, that's part of what we do as a community.
Or really just thinking about their day, because we all have those points in the day. Maybe it's before lunch, maybe it's just mid-afternoon or whatever, where you're just really dragging. And if it's a class you don't particularly feel confident in, or a teacher you just don't with, or you had a bad day, you need to say, that's okay. That's okay, but I can't necessarily go and change my schedule all the time. But
how do you power through?
To know? Yeah, how do you power through? How do you make it till lunch? So, yeah. So, when you give kids feedback, be specific about exactly what you think they did well, and be enthusiastic about it. Now, you got to be mindful, because kids will pick up on your sarcasm, even little kids. So you have to be authentic. You have to be authentic with your feedback. It can't be way over the top. You have to be mindful of your tone, because again, kids will recognize it if you're being not authentic. And sometimes it's your volume. Like some kids may not want everyone to know you said they did a good job. So you have to sometimes keep it low and think about the language that you're using. And you just have to be aware that, are you always giving feedback to the same kid? You kind of have to like spread the wealth around and give kids feedback. But remember, what you do and how you do it does impact the students. Again, if students will say, you know what, she always gives comments to so and so, but she never tells me I do a good job. So you have to be mindful of the way you are interacting with all the kids. But again, be specific, but don't be afraid. If they did a really good job, tell them they did a good job. I mean, trust me, they hear enough that they don't do a good job. So if they do it, and sometimes you have to be watchful and you have to catch some of the kids just the minute they do it, because sometimes they're far and few between. So you need to be there when they do it well and be authentic. Okay, who wants to do the scenario 1? Okay.
Okay, so I can read through this. So as we go through this different scenario, I want you to think about just some general observations that you might have. I want you to think about the can't do versus won't do and what is potentially going on here. And then think about some different intervention ideas, some probing strategies that we might be able to use. And I know that's a lot, and I don't expect you to remember all of it. But I'm going to read through the scenario so you can follow along with me. You can just listen, whatever is your preferred way of taking in this information here. So we are in Mrs. Rivera's 5th grade classroom. Students are working independently on math word problems. One student, Jaden, has been sitting quietly at his desk for 15 minutes, staring at the page. When the paraprofessional, Ms. Johnson, approaches and gently prompts him to get started, he responds with a shrug and says, "I don't want to do it." He then turns away and begins doodling in his notebook. Ms. Johnson notes that Jaden often avoids math tasks and wonders whether he's being defiant or if something else is going on. She discusses the situation with Mrs. Rivera during a break. All right, so what do you think here in this particular scenario? Let me pull up the notes. Oh,
Wait, oh, no, sorry.
you're good.
We're on.
Just thinking, what are some observations that you would make during this situation? And as you're considering that, I want you to think about, are there any signs that Jaden might feel overwhelmed or frustrated? And I see, Michelle, you've given us several things to think about. Oh, it all just, okay. It's a story problem. Does he have a hard time with reading? Notes that math isn't his favorite. So does he maybe not know where to start or how to break it down? He might be avoiding. He might be shutting down. Staffy says she would take him for a break. Leslie, I like your suggestion. I would first assume he needs a prompt or support to get started. And Robin comments that his body language shows frustration. I love that observation. You guys are having some great thoughts in here. Yes, maybe he's worried about something outside of school. Ask how you can help. And sometimes when we have those open-ended questions for kids, those might be more difficult. So saying, maybe giving a choice in that might also be something that we consider. So I see example, I'm not sure, maybe an example of a choice. You might say, do you want me to help you get started on this problem now? Or would you like me to come back in 60 seconds? And then that might give you like the option, or not really the option, but it would give you the opportunity to see, maybe if he doesn't get started, then maybe, you just need to give him the prompt. Asking him if he'd like to go somewhere else to work. That's a good thought too. So what do you think? Is this a can't do, or is this a won't do situation? Is it just downright refusal? He's had 15 minutes. Keep that in mind. Trying to see here. What? It could be both. Can't do, not ready yet.
I think one of the cues here for me really had to do with he stared at the page for 15 minutes. Not that that's the only cue here, or that there's really like one truthfully right answer, but something here for me, he stared at the page. We know that the behavior wasn't necessarily disrespectful, not causing an issue. In the classroom, just staring at the page. For me, that was a sign, my student wants to learn but doesn't know where to start. And I think with other students that I can think of in the past, it might be like, I just won't do it. I'm just going to stare here defiantly. So I think that this scenario can kind of go either way, but we're all sort of picturing students in different ways, right? I love that that's coming up in the chat. This can be both. It's a little bit of can't, a little bit of won't. I like that. You guys are right on point here.
Yep. Okay, here's the next one.
Hold on, before, well, I guess we kind of did that. Okay.
Okay, so I don't think I can, hold on, I got to change this so I can see it. Okay, and this, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, you clicked off of it.
Oh, it clicked to, okay, sorry, there. Sorry.
In Miss Carter's second grade class, students are engaged in independent reading. Sophia, a quiet and reserved student, has her book open but isn't turning any pages. Instead, she's fiddling with her eraser and looking around the room. When the paraprofessional, Mr. Lee, asks Sophia what's happening, she says, "I don't like reading," and puts her head down. Mr. Lee notices that Sophia often avoids reading during independent time, but seems to enjoy other activities like group discussions or art projects. He's unsure whether she's struggling with reading skills or simply uninterested in the task. I love how fast you ask her. Let's talk to her about it. Ask what she needs in this moment. If she's able to verbalize that and share, yeah, great. Sarah says, I would offer to read with her and then offer to sketch note what we read, since she likes to draw. Maybe needing to hear it out loud. Ask if she's enjoying the book or if she needs a different one. I love how you embedded choice there, Leslie. Adding on to the previous scenario, I think when we embed choice, that's content related. So when it comes to some of that behavior, offering, do you want to get started now, or do you want to take a break first and then start? But also some things with content, it could be, do you want me to, do you want me to read the first 2 words or 2 lines and then you read the next 2 lines? That's what we're going to do. Do you want to read the first 2 or the next 2? So giving those kinds of choices where the student is still focused on the task, but they have a choice of who they want to start. That's a good one. Take turns reading. I love that. Struggles with reading for sure. Yeah, I read, you read, love it. That confidence is so key, Joyce.
So we good?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yep.
And in Mr. Daniels' 10th grade English class, students are working on drafting their essays for a literary analysis assignment. The prompts ask them to analyze the theme of resilience in a novel they just finished reading. Most students are quietly writing, but Devin is sitting with his head down, scrolling on his phone under the desk. When the paraprofessional, Miss Green, approaches and asks Devin how his essay is going, he mutters, "I don't know what to write," and shrugs. When she offers to help, Devin sighs and says, "It's pointless. I hate essays." Miss Green knows that Devin often struggles with written assignments, but also sometimes avoid work he finds. Guys, what does it say at the bottom? He finds what?
He finds boring or tedious. She wonders whether Devin is struggling with the essay
Thanks.
structure or simply unmotivated to complete the work.
Right. So what do you think?
What do you do in this situation as a para?
Do it together. Take his phone for sure. Make sure he understands the problem. Ask him questions to give him ideas. That's awesome.
Just because we know a lot of times with kids in writing, they can't figure out the idea to get started. They just need something.
Right. Kind of like, okay, we're just going to start with one sentence, one idea. Sketch noting. He won't do it. He's using the phone as a distraction. An anchor chart, that's a good idea too. Toss out some ideas, kind of review the story with him. Open-ended questions.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. Break the task into parts. That's a good idea too, especially for a 10th grader.
And don't forget to go back to, the prompt itself. I mean, the assignment that he's been been given is writing an essay for on the theme of resilience. So does he understand theme? Does he understand resilience? Maybe giving examples of those sorts of things, and then really understanding literary analysis. That's a concept that students may, the teacher may have thought he or she did a great job explaining it, but maybe the student needs more examples. So always consider the instructions too.
Right. An outline. And I would say that instead of like scribing for him, somebody's suggestion about having him talk, you could have him do the voice to text and just talk his ideas out himself on a document to then have to reorganize, and which is easier than scribing. So he could dictate to you, but it would be more helpful to learn that voice to text so he could do it himself, which is a great idea. Sometimes they have the ideas in their head, they just don't know how to get it down on the paper. Okay. You guys have great responses. Okay. What questions do you have? Because it is, oh, look at that, 5:27. So what questions do you have? Any questions? You can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourselves. What questions you have about won't and can't? And sometimes we don't get it right. Sometimes we think it's one thing and then we realize partway through it's something else, but that's okay. That's a learning process for us, just learning each kid in their own style.
I have a question. I'm on my phone doing the virtual and I can't scan it. So how do I get to do the website to do the survey?
I just put it in the chat.
Oh,
Can
I
you
just
see
saw
the-
that. Yes, I just
Okay,
saw that.
okay.
Thank you.
And also when when you get the certificate, there will be a link to it too.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Anybody else? Questions?
I just want to say again, I appreciate the way that you guys keep the chat going. You
Yeah,
just do such a great job of that. Your insights, your thoughts, questions, all of those are just so good. And I feel like we get so much more out of this when we're so interactive.
yep. And here we all are. If you need to have any other questions or whatever, you can reach us, one of us somehow. Okay,
The chat's asking if you go back to the QR code, please. There you are.
there.
Yeah.
Yep. You good?
And next time for our next session, we'll be kind of digging a little deeper into prompting. So I know we breezed over it today, but we knew that it was going to be a full session where we'll talk about what each level of prompting looks like, and we'll give you some great suggestions for getting started using those prompts in your classroom and how to scaffold and support those in meaningful ways.
Well, thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone.